High class. So, as Halloween approaches, it only feels fitting to revisit one of cinema's most haunting masterpieces, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. I chose this film because it changed the very definition of fear on screen. Psycho isn't a story about murder, it's about the monsters that actually lurk inside the mind. Hitchcock took the comforts of an everyday life, like a shower, a high-low motel, and a polite young man, and turned them into sources of dread. His masterful control of tension, sound, and perspective showed what a real horror comes from, not from what we see, but it's from what we imagine. So, in the spirit of Halloween, Psycho remains a chilling reminder that the scariest things are often hidden in plain sight. So if we look at the movie, Psycho begins with Marion Crane, and she's a secretary from Phoenix, who steals $40,000 from her employer in hopes of starting her new life. This impulsive act kind of leads her to the remote Bates Motel run by the shy and courteous Norman Bates, who appears dominated by this unforeseen mother. After a tense conversation about guilt and isolation, Marianne decides to return the stolen money to her employer. But that night, in one of the most iconic moments in film history, she is murdered in the shower by a shadowy figure. The story then shifts as Marianne's sister Lila, her boyfriend Sam, and a private investigator search for her. This investigation uncovers the film's horrifying truths. Norman's mother has been dead for years, and Norman himself suffers from a split personality, believing that he is actually his mother. So if we look at the final scene in which Norman sits alone in his cell, it seems kind of eerie and blurs the lines between like sanity and madness, which is a common psychological twist that left a huge mark on cinema. Psycho revolutionized cinema through its narrative structure, sound design, and the ambiguity. It broke away from the predictable storytelling of the 1950s and introduced psychological realism that defines modern thrillers and horror films. So to kind of prepare for this project, I researched Psycho's historical context and his influence on contemporary filmmakers. This film was released at a time of cultural restraint when audiences were unaccustomed to seeing moral ambiguity or open depictions of fear. So my sources included essays from the Criterion Collection, the British Film Institute, as well as Francois Truffaut's interviews with Hitchcock and Truffaut in 1985. I also reviewed a lot of modern directors' reflections on Hitchcock's influence, particularly by Jordan Peele and David Fincher. Short clips were also obtained from movieclips.com under fair use for educational critique with commentary added, just to make sure it met all the guidelines. But if we look again at when Psycho was premiered, a lot of the audience were stunned by how bold it was, not only for its violence, but for the psychology behind it. So Hitchcock's decision to kill off one of the leading actresses mid-film and reveal a fractured identity was kind of something that broke Hollywood. So if we were to compare Psycho or Alfred Hitchcock's style of noir, we can see films like Get Out, Hereditary, and The Babadook that mirror Hitchcock's techniques. So they usually isolate the characters, they use a lot of silence before a big impact, and they craft tension through emotion rather than creating a spectacle. So just as Norman Bates hides from his secrets behind the polite manners, modern horror often hides its monsters behind familiar faces. So Hitchcock's storytelling has taught later directors how to kind of use that suspense and what works best for the audience imagination. So if you can pretty much have the audience imagine it and not show them, it's pretty scary. You know what I mean? You have to use your own brain to come up with scary things like that. The brain is impressive. Technically, this was a groundbreaking film in a lot of different ways. So one way that I saw it was super groundbreaking was just in general with cinematography and camera movement. So like Hitchcock used a lot of tight, confining camera angles to create a sense of entrapment and voyeurism. So one of the film's most famous shots was obviously the shower scene. In my research, I found that they actually had used 78 camera setups, 52 cuts, and over 45 seconds. It was only 45 seconds of screen time, which is actually kind of impressive. So instead of showing the knife penetrating the flesh, Hitchcock kind of relied on the rapid montage, the editing, and the audience imagination to produce the horror almost through like an implication. Another way that I kind of saw this was like through lighting and black and white photography. I don't know if you guys know this, but that's kind of why I chose the black and white for today's video. I mean, color was already around in the 1960s. So, when this movie was released, you think that this movie would have came out completely in color, but I think that having it in black and white added a much more scary aspect to it. This decision to have it in black and white, I think, served artistic and practical purposes. It reduced the production cost of like having to add color to it, and it kind of toned down the gore. So it kind of like made it a little less scary or a little more censored. But it also amplified the shadows and contrast to kind of give it a little bit stark, almost a realistic vibe to it. You know what I mean? Just wanted to add that in there. I had a really good time researching this movie. Yeah. Have a great day, guys.